Hello, this is Steve Wood, and thanks for joining us on Luke 21 as we study biblical prophecy. We are still in that very important chapter, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, which talks about the restrainer of the Antichrist. Let me read those verses for you again, starting in verse 6. And you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time. Verse 7, for the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains it will do so until he is out of the way. Verse 8, and then the lawless one will be revealed, and the Lord Jesus will slay him with the breath of his mouth, and destroy him by his appearing and his coming. That's his second coming. Now, we have been looking at the restrainer, and I've already highlighted the biblical reasons, especially from the prophet Daniel, coupled with 2 Thessalonians 2, why St. Michael the Archangel is the restrainer. In our last episode, we dealt with the question, is Donald Trump the restrainer? A modern restrainer, and not in the sense of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Even though a very high-ranking, very noble, conservative Catholic leader made the claim, it's simply not true, and it's absolutely impossible, because I don't know if you caught it in my voice, but in 2 Thessalonians 2, St. Paul says, you know what is restraining? That's present tense in the first century. And it says the mystery of lawlessness is already at work, but he who now restrains. We're talking about 49 to 51 AD, so it couldn't be Donald Trump. But there's another claim, is that Pope Benedict was the restrainer. Now, it's impossible for Pope Benedict to be the restrainer, the same reason that Donald Trump couldn't be the restrainer. The restrainer was active 2,000 years ago, and you can't, their lifespan is way, way, way after the restrainer already began. There was an important article in a magazine called New Oxford Review, and I highly recommend the New Oxford Review. It's a great magazine. You can get the online edition, which I do. I also get a free daily kind of Catholic email update from them. And multiple times on my online edition, an article has popped up that I regard very important. It was an article highlighting the statements by Peter Seewald. And Peter Seewald was an atheist who started interviewing Cardinal Ratzinger way back and ended up multiple book-length interviews. And these are books that are very valuable, highlighting the thought of Cardinal Ratzinger, then to become Pope Benedict. Seewald, who was an atheist, ended up becoming a Catholic. The last book, I believe, was the autobiography of Pope Benedict. He assisted the Pope in writing that. So I think it could be fair to say that Peter Seewald is perhaps the person closest to Pope Benedict, particularly the last years of his life, the person closest on earth. But Peter Seewald is the one, in recent statements, 2023 and 2024, saying that Pope Benedict was the restrainer. And it appeared in an article in New Oxford Review highlighting his statements. Now, don't toss out this article and keep your thinking caps on, because this isn't just a simple thing. I think Peter Seewald is wrong for the same reasons that the Catholic leader who said Pope Benedict is a restrainer is wrong, because it's impossible for them to be, because of the present tense of the restrainer in the first century. So you can't use 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 for that reason. I do not recommend you toss aside that article from New Oxford Review. In fact, if it was me, I kind of like these things. I think it's almost worth a subscription to New Oxford Review just to get a hold of this article, and I'll give you the exact title of it. Was Pope Benedict the 16th holding back the destroying flood. And by the destroying flood, it's the apocalyptic things. In other words, once the restrainer is removed, evil spreads. Now, I recommend paying very close attention to the first paragraph and last 5 paragraphs of this article. The first paragraph goes like this, and I don't know if you've seen it, but it should raise an eyebrow or two. It's a quote from Pope Benedict in 2015. This was after his resignation, and this is it. We see how the power of Antichrist is expanding, and we can only pray that the Lord will give us strong shepherds who will defend his church in this hour of need from the power of evil, unquote. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI in 2015. That should raise some eyebrows. I have very, very high regard for Pope Benedict. I think his teaching, particularly since he follows so closely St. Augustine and St. Augustine's stamp on biblical prophecy in the Western world, for both Catholics and what I would call Protestants before the rapture fever kind of invaded things, it was St. Augustine's view of the end which was so predominant. Now, according to this quote from Pope Benedict, it's real clear that he believed we are currently experiencing apocalyptic dangers from the Antichrist. And so, although I disagree with Peter Seewald quite strongly that Pope Benedict is the restrainer, he couldn't be, I do believe we need to pay attention what this article summarizing Seewald's declarations, the last 5 paragraphs, where we have to pay a lot of attention. And let me start with one of those. Seewald says, but the Antichrist is intimately associated with the church. Way back in 1956, a young Ratzinger, in his 5th year of ordination, said, the Antichrist belongs to the church and grows in it, with it, up to the great separation. The great separation. Now, I'll tell you, alarm bells started going off in my mind, neon warning signs. This is a very clear indicator because I don't see anything in Peter Seewald's background that he would know what the Great Separation is even talking about unless it came from Pope Benedict. You see, Pope Benedict was a great student of St. Augustine. But St. Augustine's whole premise for the city of God, even though he modified it considerably, and his whole outline of biblical prophecy came from a writer called Tychonius, just a little bit younger than St. Augustine. Tychonius wrote a commentary on the book of Revelation that was used by the Catholic Church widely for 8 centuries. How many people's commentaries are still read after 8 centuries? And it goes on, Seewald talks about, again, the great separation is now upon us. This is what Tychonius was talking about. From the beginning, he says, the church was mixed. It is both the church of Christ and the church of the Antichrist. St. Augustine in City of God, you had the city of man, city of the world, and the city of God. But Tychonius had 3 groups that made up humanity. You had the world, but in the church, you had 2 groups, as discussed by Jesus in his parable of the wheat and the tares. And these 2 grow together until the end, and then there's a great separation. And don't ask me exactly what that entails. I'm not sure, but I do know that Father Ratzinger, way back in the 50s, was talking about these things and warning about them. And so if the Pope is telling us that the Antichrist is growing stronger and we need to pray against his attacks against the church, this is something that Pope Benedict, as a follower of St. Augustine, as well as shortly before he died, he made reference to the teachings of Tychonius, and we should pay attention to it. So if you want a good contemporary outline of, I would say, the man closest to Pope Benedict, Peter Seewald, I disagree that he was the restrainer, but do not throw this article away. The first paragraph and the last 5 paragraphs are really, really critical, because once you start digging into the prophetic outline of St. Augustine, which the Catholic Church still holds today, it's basically reflected in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. But if you get into St. Augustine, you run smack into Tychonius as well. And it seems that Pope Benedict held both. And although I disagree with Seewald that Pope Benedict's the restrainer, I do believe that something has happened with the very unusual resignation of Pope Benedict. He resigned, but he didn't resign, in sense he's Pope Emeritus. He left the Vatican, but he didn't leave the Vatican. He lived in the Vatican, and he saw the Antichrist growing in the modern world. And as early as 1956, 1958, he was making I'm talking about Father Ratzinger, was making very bold statements of things that were going on in the world and in the church, and we need to be aware of that. And so here we have, I think, a very valuable thing, and it shows you also sometimes we need to navigate a little bit. It would have been very easy for me to read the headline and read a few paragraphs into Peter Seewald's declaration about Benedict being the restrainer. I said, nah, that can't be, and just toss the whole thing away. But you get to the end, when you start words about the great separation and the two sides of the church, left and right, that's Tychonius. And anybody who studies biblical prophecy from a Catholic point of view studies St. Augustine. And anybody who studies St. Augustine, surprise, surprise, runs into Tychonius. And Peter Seewald is bringing this forward with apocalyptic warnings for our day. And the church isn't immune for these things, because the wheat and the tares grow inside the church. And as early as the 50s, Father Ratzinger was warning, the Antichrist grows in the church. Not the Antichrist will appear necessarily in the church, because he'll probably be somewhat of a political figure with religious overtones. The warning is out there. And so it is my belief that although Seewald is wrong regarding the restrainer, I believe that Seewald is right in his interpretation of what's going on in the church, what's going on in the world, what's going on with the teaching of Tychonius, which applies for our day. And I encourage you to get a hold of his article, the New Oxford Review. Read those last 5 paragraphs and the first paragraph, and heed what's said. Thanks for joining me on Luke 21.